I appreciate it. My name's Michael. I'll be talking about the kind of shifting perceptions that we feel in our institution that there are kind of varying kind of perceptions from the different kind of stakeholders within the course. This is the first presentation I've given in about 10 years, so if I look very, very nervous, that's why. Okay, so I mean, essentially this is it. The whole point of this kind of research project was to try to find a sense of kind of common ground between the different actors within the course, because we felt kind of initially during this kind of collaboration, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, that there was some teething problems, especially in the initial stages. So this is, can you see that? No, you can't because I pressed the wrong one. So this is who we are, basically. So I'm from Turkey. The university that we're teaching at is called Sabancı University in Istanbul. It was established, established fairly recently, just over 20 years ago. It's a privately funded university. That doesn't mean it's rich. We're not swimming in money. There are kind of limits to the amount of funding that we have, especially recently, given the economic kind of problems that Turkey's experiencing. But it is kind of, compared to some of the publicly funded universities, a lot more kind of better off in terms of its facilities. Its curriculum is largely based on a kind of American-style liberal arts kind of curriculum. So I mean, essentially in its freshman year, students, they have a mixture of kind of elective and compulsory courses. And most students end up being engineering students or computer science students. So I mean, they're not overly enamored by the idea of having a social and political science course as one of their kind of compulsory courses. That doesn't make it a hugely fun kind of experience teaching them in class. A lot of them have an intrinsic kind of interest in topics such as history and politics and sociology and so on and so forth, but the vast majority feel like they're kind of being forced to take this course, which essentially they are, I guess, yeah. So yeah, it's a 2 kind of semester compulsory freshman year course. We refer to it as SPS 101, 102 in the fall and the spring semesters. Essentially, as I've said, it's a mixture of different kind of sociological, kind of historical, political topics, ranging from the early stages of civilization right up until climate change and things like that. Yeah? So that's who we are in terms of the institution. The people working within the SPS course, and I'm going to be using lots of these acronyms, unfortunately. Maybe you should write them down. There are too many acronyms in academia. So SPS, Social Political Sciences, the people working within this course are kind of threefold in terms of their kind of responsibilities. The first of them, not necessarily in order of importance, but I just happen to put ourselves at the top there. The EAP kind of ESL teachers, the kind of professional teachers within the course, we were brought by the director of this course about 5 or 6 years ago to kind of help facilitate the teaching in terms of the kind of language component of the course, basically. So we're professional kind of EAP teachers. A lot of us have 15, 20 years of kind of teaching within this kind of profession. We refer to ourselves as SL facilitators because a lot of us come from the School of Languages, which is the kind of preparatory school for students who didn't manage to pass the language exam to get into faculty, basically. So they have to go through either a 6-month or a 12-month program to kind of help them with their language. So the first group we refer to as the SL facilitators. The second are the FASS facilitators. Would anyone like to hazard a guess as to what FASS may stand for? Very good, exactly. So yeah, I mean, these are essentially students, graduate students, who have come to the university. They're predominantly MA students. We get a few PhD students teaching in the course. They're like kind of gold dust because they actually have a higher level of English. But I mean, these are our co-teachers, essentially, yeah? They're not teaching assistants. That's been made kind of very, very clear to us by the director of the course. We are, in theory at least, equals in terms of our teaching responsibilities in the classroom. But obviously they come with very little, if any, kind of teaching experience. So I mean, they're on a different kind of level in terms of how they're able to engage with the students in the classroom. So we have SL facilitators, FASS facilitators, and finally we have the lecturers, people with kind of vast kind of academic kind of backgrounds, people who have published in history and kind of political sciences and these topics, yeah? So we have three kind of distinct groups of kind of stakeholders within the course, and this collaboration, as it shows, kind of started a few years ago. I mean, basically what we wanted to do within the scope of this research was to determine whether or not these kind of different backgrounds that we had in terms of our kind of professional and kind of academic backgrounds affected the way that the SL facilitators, these kind of professional EAP teachers within the classroom, were perceived by the different stakeholders within the course. So how we perceived ourselves versus how the FASS facilitators and the course instructors or lecturers perceived us. Because, I mean, initially, especially at the beginning of the course, we felt that there was a lot of friction in terms of how we were managing to kind of interact with each other, especially perhaps not so much the two kind of teaching groups within the classroom, but between the lecturers, the people who were predominantly involved in designing the course and organizing, administrating the course, and the SL facilitators. So there were some teething problems, and the aim is to investigate, compare, and establish, essentially. Yeah? We wanted to investigate whether there were differences in how we were being perceived compared with how we perceived our own role within the course, compare how these kind of perceptions differed across different groups, and perhaps even at the end of that kind of establish some kind of framework for mitigating these kind of differences between the three different groups. So this is what we try to do. I'm not necessarily kind of suggesting that we were successful in this attempt, especially the third one. I think some problems are more difficult to kind of solve than others, but this is essentially what we wanted to do. And in terms of collecting data, we considered the kind of most time efficient and effective way was just to kind of sit down and interview a few kind of participants from each of these three groups. Unfortunately, this kind of coincided with COVID as well. So initially we had the idea of kind of doing it face to face, having a more kind of interpersonal kind of interaction with them. That wasn't possible. So they were conducted online and recorded with their permission. I keep pressing that. And this is what we got, essentially. I mean, we transcribed all of the interviews. We kind of sifted through each and every one and came up with a list of kind of labels that we could associate as being the roles of the SL facilitator in the classroom. So these are essentially, we're going to have a look at a more kind of detailed look a bit later, kind of comparing the different groups, but kind of globally, this is what it looked like, essentially. And unsurprisingly, we have labels like teacher, especially skills teacher, experts as well, mentors, these kinds of high frequency labels kind of coming up. The more interesting kind of analysis would be the comparison. So looking at each one kind of group by group, starting with the FASS facilitators, this is how they kind of compare in terms of frequency, yeah? So again, teacher is the most high kind of level, kind of most frequently used label. For some reason, which worries me slightly, experts is the least used kind of term or role associated with us in the classroom. I'm not sure. Maybe we can kind of do some kind of follow-on work and kind of determine why that might be. Yeah. In terms of teaching, I've also kind of distinguished between the different types of teaching that they may see us as doing. So skills teaching. Essentially, I forgot to mention actually that in the second hour of each class that we hold with these students, the focus is on academic writing, basically. So summary, response paper in the first semester, so in SBS 101, and in the second semester, once they've passed SBS 101, it's a process essay, basically. Yeah? So skills teaching, content teaching, so going over the content of the lecture, perhaps going over particular kind of topics that they've come across in their readings that week, or they heard in the lecture and didn't quite kind of understand. Yeah.
Just to clarify, so this is what how the FASS facilitators saw the role of the EAP.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So they saw us as predominantly being teachers. So we are the kind of, even though there is this kind of idea that we are equals within the classroom, they perhaps see us as being the kind of the main or kind of predominant teachers, given the disparity in our levels of experience. Co-teacher is another one, because we're teaching together, and the others are very kind of low on the kind of frequency of kind of mention. So these are some of the comments. There were quite a few, so I've kind of randomly taken a few interesting ones. I'll give you maybe a minute or two to have a look at that. Nobody's timing me, so I'm...
Sorry.
Don't worry.
I think at 3 minutes past 6, it's been 20 minutes.
Okay, cool.
So 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, 8 minutes.
So essentially, I mean, the first two focus on our levels of experience, kind of pedagogical, kind of teaching expertise, our kind of mentoring abilities as well. So, I mean, obviously they need a lot of help, not only in the classroom, but we meet up with them kind of before the classroom as well. We go over lesson plans and kind of iron out any kind of problems that they anticipate having. So that's a big role. That's a kind of, we spend a lot of time kind of helping the kind of FASS facilitators, kind of nurturing and supporting them. What they don't see us as having is a kind of an interest or a role in the kind of general administration of the course. Yeah, this is something that they, even though we do actually, we design a lot of the materials in the course. This isn't something that they see us actually actively doing. So they're not particularly aware of our role in that, and the role of a researcher as well. I think this kind of goes back to their academic background versus our kind of pedagogical kind of class-based background. There is a lot of that in this course. So these are kind of some of the sample comments from the FASS facilitators. Comparing that with the SL facilitators, so how did we see ourselves? We interviewed a number of our colleagues as EAP practitioners within the course, and this is the frequency of the kind of how frequently each of these roles or labels were mentioned. Yeah. Again, teaching is high up there. Experts as well. Rather modestly, we do believe ourselves to be experts at what we do. Whether that's accurate or not, I have no idea. But if you kind of compare the first graph with the second one, the disparity between teaching and the rest is quite high, whereas there's a more rounded kind of view of what we kind of view ourselves as doing naturally, because we know what we do. We have a kind of clear idea how much time we spend teaching versus how much time we spend tutoring our students and our co-facilitators designing course materials and so on and so forth. So that's natural, I think. There's kind of emphasis towards teaching, but also an appreciation of how much time and how much involved we are in other aspects of the course. And these are some sample comments from the SL facilitators. Yeah, I mean, how we perceive others as perceiving us is also something we were interested in. Yeah? So our kind of perception of other people's perception of us is that we're essentially tools for teaching language in the classroom. We feel ourselves perhaps in certain situations that we're not overly appreciated in terms of the other things we do in the course, especially designing course materials and the amount of time, for example, we spend in tutoring our students on a one-to-one basis. These things perhaps aren't overly appreciated according to our perception of other people's perception of us, if that makes any sense. Okay, and the final one is the lecturer's perspective. So these are the people who give the weekly lectures, and they have very little, if any, interaction with the students unless they're complaining about this, in which case they do. But again, I think it's quite similar to the FASS perspectives. There is a greater emphasis on an appreciation of our expertise. Again, designing the course, even though we actually we co-design the course, and this was the initial kind of contract that we made with the kind of faculty people when we agreed to become part of the course, was that we would have a say in the course design and how things would be examined and so on and so forth. That hasn't necessarily panned out the way it was meant to, and I think perhaps this kind of single mention of designing the course is reflective of that kind of opinion of us as not being entirely kind of responsible for the kind of design of the course as much as the kind of facilitation and the teaching of the course, essentially. Yeah. So this, I mean, there are some differences, there are some similarities. I think these are some comments from the lecturers or the coordinators. So there's a high appreciation, as with the FASS facilitators, for our teaching experience. They realize that we were brought in to help with the language of our students, not necessarily the content. I think there's not a lot of trust placed in us for teaching content, which is why the FASS facilitators, that's kind of primarily their responsibility in terms of teaching content. But yeah, the kind of one-to-one kind of interaction with our students, either in a classroom kind of environment or in a one-to-one kind of tutorial-based environment, yeah? Okay, so I mean, looking at the number of references or labels within each group, bless you, tells us something, but doesn't really give us a clear idea as to the kind of value placed within each group. What would give us a clearer idea is the number of references as a percentage of the total number of references to a label within each group. For example, there were 42 references within the SL facilitator group to different labels. So all of those labels we looked at before. Of those 43 references, 10 of them were references to us being a teacher. So from our own perspective of ourselves, almost a quarter of our role or responsibility is kind of teaching related, yeah? This is the highest kind of frequency in terms of percentage worth within each group for the SL facilitators. The highest one for the FASS is also teaching, and equally for the lecturers, yeah? So there's kind of similarity in terms of the predominant role that we have within our kind of responsibilities as SL facilitators. Where it begins to differ a little bit is with the other ones. So the second most frequent for the SL facilitators is the experts. Again, I think that's kind of understandable. We appreciate our own expertise. When you've been doing something for 20 years, I think that's natural. With our FASS facilitators, it's being a co-teacher. This is the second most frequent. And for the lecturers, interestingly, it's being a designer, which brings me, yeah, okay, never mind. Okay, so I mean, I think, and the third one from our perspective is designing the course from our own perspective. Similarly, from a FASS facilitator's perspective, designing the course, and the third one is our level of expertise, yeah? So This is how they kind of compare kind of in terms of their kind of percentage worth within each group. Okay, so I mean the last kind of part of this I want to talk about is what we can kind of determine from this. I think essentially what I can see from this data is that the type of interaction that we have with each other determines the perception they have with us. I mean, it seems kind of a simple thing to say, but I mean, we have a very kind of rounded overview of our own kind of roles as a self-facilitator. Whereas the FASS facilitators who teach with us in the classroom environment and learn from our experience and treat us as mentors naturally kind of see us, after being a teacher, as being a co-teacher. Yeah? So I think the type of kind of interaction that we have with our colleagues within each group kind of informs the perception that they have of us. Yeah? Okay. I mean, in terms of, I mean, initially the idea of this course was to kind of find a way of mitigating the kind of differences in the perceptions that we have or other people have of us. And essentially, I think the key word to doing this is visibility. When we're invisible within the course, it's very difficult for us to kind of promote our role in terms of doing the things that we think we should get credit for doing, like designing the courses, like being involved in creating exam materials. How do we do this? How do we push ourselves onto sometimes unwilling or perhaps slightly disinterested kind of parties within the group? Well, I think it's impossible. Yeah, I don't think that's a very kind of positive or kind of productive thing to do. You shouldn't kind of push yourselves on people, but you can exploit the positive things that people perceive you as being capable of. So if we're perceived as being expert teachers, as having a high level of pedagogical experience within the classroom, then we can exploit that to increase our visibility within the university as a whole. So instead of kind of secluding ourselves within the School of Languages or hiding in the halls of faculty, cowering for fear of being criticized for misunderstanding some historical concept, we can exploit our teaching experience to kind of broaden the pedagogical knowledge of other people within faculty. So our FASS facilitators, for example, recently we've started the Graduate 501 teacher training course. So here we aim to kind of exploit our experience in terms of helping our FASS facilitators kind of do better in the classroom. So we're trying to kind of encourage them to use different kind of teaching methods and techniques and so on and so forth. Yeah. We can promote our kind of role as researchers in kind of course design and things like that by presenting at conferences such as this. Yeah. Future possibilities for this research, if we choose to kind of continue it, is maybe looking at how students perceive us as well. So that's a kind of a different kind of avenue of research. Another topic that kind of came up incidentally, not necessarily kind of related to this, but from talking to the FASS facilitators and the lecturers, is the difference between how being online and face-to-face, having that kind of difference in interaction affected their perception of us as well. So a certain kind of FASS facilitators, for example, that said that their experience of teaching with us in the classroom was different when it was face-to-face, versus when it was online. So it'd be interesting to kind of look at why and how that kind of difference emerged and what the reasons for it may be. There's nobody to hold up the stop thing. I'm assuming that somebody is... You're very tired. I appreciate you coming. I have finished. Are there any questions? Would anyone like to ask anything?